Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me for another edition of MTEL Test Prep. My name is Professor Hermanson. This is the second video in a series of videos designed to help you prepare to take the MTEL Communication and Literacy exam. That's the Massachusetts Test for Educator Licensure. And there are two parts of the communication and literacy exam: the reading subtest, which I covered in my previous video, and the writing subtest, which we're covering on today's video. So the communication and literacy exam is required of everyone who is taking the MTEL, everyone who is pursuing teaching licensure in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Now, the writing subtest is a lot heavier than the reading subtest. There's a lot of material covered on this exam, and it's going to be challenging. It's going to test your memory when it comes to grammar and punctuation and writing a thesis statement and all kinds of stuff that, depending on where you are in your college education, might be a distant memory from Comp 1 or a distant memory from high school or even before that. So my advice to you is to follow along closely, to pause and take breaks as often as you need to access the resources that I have made available in the description of this video, which will include a copy of this PowerPoint. It will also include links to my other presentations and videos on the subject. Now, who am I? My name is Professor Hermanson. I am an assistant professor in the English department at Westfield State University in Westfield, Mass. Go Owls. My email address is on the screen. You are more than welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you have. I am an advisor and a committee member of the English Education Committee in the English department at Westfield State. I have been advising future English teachers for the past 5 years. And I have helped countless students prepare to take the MTEL exams with great success. I also teach in a very important course in the teaching licensure sequence at my institution, which is Principles and Applications of Grammar. And that expertise will really come in handy for today's video, preparing you for the writing subtest. So, a little bit of background information about the exams. The MTELs are currently being administered. I'm recording this in December of 2020. These exams are currently being administered online as online proctored exams. So when you go to sign up for the exams, you are offered basically every month there is a week during which you can take the exams, and they are administered remotely. So you'll take these at home. The reading subtest is all multiple choice, as you might remember. The writing subtest is not. So depending on how you feel about multiple choice questions, that's either great or this is a nightmare. But the writing subtest consists of 35 multiple choice questions, 7 short answer sentence correction items. Those are sentences that contain a couple of grammar errors that you are then asked to correct. You are not given possible answer options, so that is challenging for many students. And 2 open response assignments. These are basically opportunities for you to write 2 essays. One of them is a summary in which you're given a long passage and then you're asked to write a summary of that passage. The other is a composition exercise in which you are asked to write a persuasive argument, an argumentative essay. So we'll get to that at the end of today's video. So let's discuss the subtests very quickly and what material you can expect to find on the writing subtest. So the writing subtest does contain a lot of multiple choice questions. Similar to the reading subtest, the writing subtest questions all revolve around a passage, which we will get to shortly. And this is from the MTEL's official website. This is the content you can expect to find on the writing subtest. So 15% of the test is about establishing and maintaining a main idea. Those are multiple choice questions. Another 10% are about sentence construction, grammar, and usage. Another 10% is spelling, capitalization, and punctuation. 15% of the exam are going to be those sentence correction exercises. And then those open response categories that I just mentioned. So this is the breakdown of the test. And so about 35% of the test is multiple choice. So what you'll need to do is get used to and comfortable with eliminating wrong answer options. But for reasons that we will talk about, you really should get to know the rules, what grammar rules the test is really testing you on, and to be familiar with those. So the elimination method, where you get rid of wrong answer options, can be sort of a backup, but I really do recommend that you just familiarize yourself with some of these grammar rules. And if you have trouble with the examples that I give you, maybe try to find an online resource that could be helpful for you, like the Purdue OWL or Grammarly, or a site that can help you understand those grammar rules. But I am qualified to talk about them, and I'm going to do the best I can to guide you through the forest of grammar today. So this is why the elimination method is so important. All of the multiple choice questions on the MTEL, you have given 4 answer options. So if you encounter a question that you can't answer right away, you have a 25% chance of getting it right if you guess, right? Which is not great odds. If you can eliminate 1 wrong answer, you now have a 33.3333% chance of guessing the right answer. If you eliminate 2, you have a 50% chance of getting the right answer. Don't test me on the math. I'm not totally sure, but I do know it's better to eliminate wrong answers, right? But again, the best way to prepare for the writing subtest of the MTEL Common Literacy exam is to learn the rules. They are not fun. You're going to have to dust off the cobwebs of those grammar books that you read, or think about that one grammar teacher who scrawled all over your paper in red pen. You're going to have to relive some ugly memories, but the best way to prepare for this is to learn the rules. I'm going to help you do that today, right? So here's what the multiple choice questions look like. They concern short passages about boring subjects. We saw this with the reading exam. They're not going to make this easy on you by giving you a scintillating passage about something fascinating that you actually care about. They just won't be that nice. Instead, it's going to be about, the speed at which algae grows on the wall or something. It's never going to be anything interesting, right? Every once in a while, you'll luck out and there'll be a passage about something that does concern you and can hold your attention, but they're really testing your ability to pay attention to how ideas are developed in a text. And the best way to kind of test you on that is to give you something that's not totally thrilling to read, right? So in these short passages, sentences are numbered and referred to in the question stems as different parts. I don't know why, but they are. So sentence 1 will be labeled part 1. They'll have little numbers next to them. We'll see that in just a moment. So how can you approach a question, a multiple choice question on this test? Here's what I suggest that you do. As much as you might be tempted to jump ahead to the actual questions, the numbered multiple choice questions, you have to read the passage, right? I know that that's not what you want to hear, but you need to read the passage through once and read it actively. That means resist every urge you have to glaze over while you're reading the passage. Just do something to delude yourself into thinking it's interesting. Pretend like you are, the world's just leading expert on starfish mating habits or whatever they're asking you about, and try to read it as actively as you can. So pay attention, stay focused, and take it 1 paragraph at a time. And if you have time and you can practice this strategy, this really works for me. Write a word or 2 in the margins, or, since you're going to be taking this, likely online, write maybe on your scrap paper a word or 2 summarizing the main focus of each paragraph so that you can quickly refer to it. So you're going to want to read the passage through once, get a good grasp on it, and then go to your questions, right? So the first category of question that you'll see in these multiple choice questions are about establishing and maintaining a central theme or a main idea. So this is just a sort of broken down, more specific version of what they're testing. So for example, they want you to be able to identify thesis statements. They want you to identify information that is not relevant to the main idea or that doesn't help you identify the main idea. They want you to identify repetitive ideas, and they want you to be able to organize sentences in a passage so that they make sense around each other, right? Now, I'm going to make another video in which I cover these main idea thesis type passages. Today is mostly going to be devoted to talking about grammar issues. So objective 0007 is going to take a back seat for today's video, but be on the lookout. In the next week, I'm going to post a video specifically about maintaining central themes and ideas and organization, okay? So I will go over 1 practice question about establishing and maintaining a central theme or idea so that you can get a sense for what these look like. So this is how the question will appear. Which part of the passage is least relevant to the main idea of the second paragraph? And again, as I told you, the sentences in each of these passages are going to be numbered. So it's really asking you about sentence 5, 6, 8, and 9, right? So we need to figure out what is least relevant to the main idea. So you're about to find out why you have to read the passage. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a world of disappointment and hurt. Because I could go directly to sentences 5, 6, 8, and 9, but I'm not going to know what the main idea of that paragraph is. So how will I know which of those sentences is least relevant to the main idea? So I'm going to have to read it. So let's do it. So this is the paragraph in question. In a study funded by NASA, researchers found that when the sun's ultraviolet rays are particularly strong, phytoplankton release a compound called DMSP. Through a series of chemical processes, the DMSP evaporates and releases dust-sized particles into the air. These particles are small enough for water to condense on, which stimulates the formation of clouds that can block direct light. Radiation from ultraviolet rays can cause skin cancer. Further study is needed to determine if phytoplankton can actually be used to improve the Earth's overall climate, making it likely that these microscopic organisms will be under the microscope for many years to come. Okay, we read the whole paragraph. I don't know about you, but while focusing and reading that main paragraph, that paragraph out loud, and I am not the world's strongest reader, automatically a sentence stood out to me as being totally off the wall, irrelevant to the rest of the paragraph. And that is that sentence 8 or part 8, right? Because nothing else in that paragraph is about ultraviolet rays, right? There's not even anything about radiation. Just everything in that sentence is really irrelevant to the rest of the paragraph other than that word ultraviolet being there, right? So what they're counting on you doing is reading the question, jumping right to the individual sentences. And if you haven't read the paragraphs or read the passage, you're not going to know when something is just way out there, right? So in this case, the correct answer is C. The passage that is, the part of the passage that is least relevant to the main idea is that weird sentence about skin cancer, which has nothing to do with the rest of the paragraph. Okay, so we're going to come back to these types of questions in the next video, but for now, let's move on to the fun part. Let's look at grammar. So this is all of the stuff covered in the writing subtest when it comes to sentence construction, grammar and usage. So this is objective 0008, which wants you to recognize common errors. So they want you to identify sentence fragments and run-ons. They want you to identify verbs that are in the wrong tense or form. They want you to be able to identify vague pronoun reference or lack of agreement between pronouns and antecedents. We'll get to that. Identify misplaced or dangling modifiers. Identify wrong or missing prepositions. Identify the incorrect use of relative pronouns. Identify imprecise or inappropriate words. And identify common errors in the use of homonyms. Okay. So in order to understand that first item, identifying sentences and run-ons, you have to know what a sentence is, right? Now, we are going to go all the way back in our time machine to when you first learned about this stuff. And I know a lot of it is in one ear and out the other, but we're going to revisit it now. It is super important that you can identify a complete sentence when you see one. There are lots of questions on the MTEL about this, okay? So what is a complete sentence? A complete sentence has a subject, which hereafter will be in red, and a verb, which hereafter will be in blue, and expresses a complete thought. Here are some examples. The dog barked. I voted. We sprinted. Those sentences don't need any more information to be complete. They can stand alone, right? Those are complete sentences. In many sentences also, verbs have objects, and those are words that receive the action of the verb. So they basically answer the what question. I drank what? I drank coffee. She kicked what? She kicked the ball. He ran what? He ran a marathon. So we have subject, verb, object. This is the most common construction in English, right? Now, independent and dependent clauses are going to be important for you to be able to recognize. Clauses are any groups of words that contain a subject and a verb. You notice something is missing. They don't necessarily express a complete thought, right? So sentences, which we just covered, are also called independent clauses. So independent clause and sentence are the same thing because they can stand alone. Dependent clauses, they do have subjects and verbs, but they can't stand alone because they don't express a complete thought, right? So I'll show you an example. These are dependent clauses. While we ate dinner, although I run 10 miles a week, you notice they leave your listener asking, while you ate dinner, what else happened, right? Although you run 10 miles a week, what? You still don't feel like you're getting enough exercise? Like, what is it, right? So those are not independent clauses, even though they do, as you can see, they have subjects, verbs, and objects. They happen to both have objects. They're not complete sentences because they can't stand alone. We need more information. So every sentence has to have at least one independent clause, right? So if you have a dependent clause that is joined with an independent clause, then you have a complex sentence. While we ate dinner, our kids played in the backyard. Now you notice you could get rid of while we ate dinner and you would have a complete sentence, right? Our kids played in the backyard. That's a complete thought, subject, verb, we're all good. But when it's joined with that dependent clause, it becomes complex, right? A compound sentence is a sentence that contains more than one independent clause. So let's say you have these two independent clauses. These are sentences, right? I am so tired, I need to go to bed. How would you join those? Well, how you join them is really a stylistic decision, but you have some options, right? You can use a coordinating conjunction, a way to remember what coordinating conjunctions are. And remember the old Schoolhouse Rock conjunction, junction, what's your function? You're hooking sentences up, right? So these coordinating conjunctions, fanboys, are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So you could join them together with something like, I am so tired, comma, and I need to go to bed. So a comma and a coordinating conjunction is one way to join independent clauses. Another option is the dreaded semicolon. This freaks a lot of students out because they don't know how to use it, but you're about to know how to use it. I am so tired, semicolon, I need to go to bed. This is grammatically correct because a semicolon's job is to connect two independent clauses. So if you see a semicolon, you have to have an independent clause or a group of words that contains a subject and a verb and can stand alone and expresses a complete idea. You have to have one of those on either side of the semicolon. Otherwise, it's not used correctly, right? So that's another way that you can join two independent clauses. A compound complex sentence is a sentence that contains more than one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So you could have a sentence like this. Before I prepared the marinara sauce, I began boiling water for the noodles, semicolon. The garlic bread was already in the oven. So I have an independent clause. I began boiling water for the noodles. I have another independent clause. The garlic bread was already in the oven. I've joined them with a semicolon, which we know is great. And then I have a dependent clause. Before I prepared the marinara sauce, right? And everything is great there because I have at least one independent clause on either side of the semicolon. So that forms a compound complex sentence. Okay. So when we have trouble is when we have clauses in a sentence that are joined together incorrectly. One way that can happen is a sentence fragment, right? A sentence fragment is a group of words that is missing one of the critical components of a sentence. A sentence fragment is either missing a subject, missing a verb, or it doesn't express a complete thought. So let's see what this looks like out in the wild, right? So here is a sample question from the MTEL. Which part of the passage is a sentence fragment? So we can look back to part 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? So let's see. Phytoplankton are microscopic drifting organisms that live in salt water and fresh water. That one is good, right? We're all good there. While the term is inclusive of a wide range of organisms, including bacteria, most phytoplankton are single-celled plants that float freely in the ocean. That one we're fine too, right? We have a dependent clause. While the term is inclusive of a wide range of organisms, including bacteria, that's the dependent clause. It is joined with an independent clause. Most phytoplankton are single-celled plants that float freely in the ocean. Providing nourishment for fish and birds. Uh-oh, I'm missing something here. I'm missing a subject, right? A subject is the person or thing or idea or whatever that is performing the action of the sentence. What is it in that sentence that is providing nourishment for fish and birds, right? I don't have the answer to that, not grammatically. So we're missing something there. We can keep reading, but we've identified the sentence fragment. Although phytoplankton are difficult to see and easy to ignore, scientists have discovered that these tiny plants have an unusual ability to indirectly affect the weather. All right, so we have a problem there, and it is definitely part 3. That sentence, providing nourishment for fish and birds, is incomplete, right? It's not enough information. That is a sentence fragment. It is a dependent clause that is punctuated like an independent clause, right? So we're going to come back to this in a bit more detail, but let's move along to verb tense. This is the other thing that the MTEL will love to ask you about. Tense refers to the time that a verb describes. So when did the action being described by the verb happen? There's past, present, and future. I walked down the street. I currently walk down the street. In the future, I will walk down the street. You'll want to pay special attention to verb tenses because they need to be consistent, right? So here's how this will show up on the MTEL. We see that in either part 3, 7, 8, or 9, we have an error in verb tense, which usually is an inconsistency in a sentence, right? So we have a big kind of hefty kind of series of sentences here. So, let's look at each of these. So part 3, let's see. Gold, for example, is so highly valued that humans have, over the centuries, endeavored to procure it in a variety of ways. Sounds good to me, right? I don't see that. I don't think that changing is to are would be any good. Gold are so highly valued. No, gold is a singular noun, right? And we want it to agree with the verb. So in that case, we don't want to change that. Let's see part 7 then, skipping ahead. Over hundreds of millions of years, liquid magma carries some of these metals toward the surface where miners could reach them. All right, we have that. I see that over hundreds of years, liquid magma carries. All right. Let's see. Let's look at part 8. We'll come back to that one. It's also possible that Earth's gold deposits were formed when billions of tons of meteorites crashed into the planet and settled at reachable depths in the Earth's mantle, where geologic processes slowly turned them to gold. It says, should we change were to had been? It's also possible that Earth's gold deposits had been formed when billions of tons of meteorites. No, because had been formed would suggest that something had already happened when something else happened. But no, this is saying that those gold deposits were actually formed when the crash happened, right? So we wouldn't want to change that. That would change the meaning of our whole sentence. And then there's part 9. This theory suggests that gold may be rarer than previously thought. After all, it came from outer space, if the theory holds true. What does it want us to change? Suggests to suggest. This theory suggests that gold may be rarer. No, because theory is a singular noun. So we want it to agree with the verb that comes after it. So that would be the theory suggests, right? So answer D is totally fine. So we definitely don't want to mess with that. Let's look back at a sentence that stood out to me, and that's sentence 7. Over hundreds of millions of years, liquid magma carries some of these metals toward the surface where miners could reach them. First of all, carries there is a present tense verb, and we're talking about something that happened over the course of hundreds of millions of years in the past, right? And we're also talking that word miners, it doesn't say where miners currently can reach them. It says where they could in the past reach them, right? So we need to make those verbs agree. So carries needs to be in the past tense. We're talking about something that happened past tense over the course of hundreds of millions of years, right? So we wouldn't want that to be in the present tense. So the answer to this question is B. We want to change carries to carried, right? Okay, so just really quickly going back to this. Pronouns, the MTEL loves to ask about pronouns. Pronouns are words that stand in for other words in a sentence, and their purpose is to cut down on repetition. So imagine without pronouns, this is what a sentence in our language would sound like. Jack got the job because Jack was the most talented applicant and Jack has the most experience. It's just, that sounds clunky, it's repetitive. We want to use a pronoun for Jack instead. Jack got the job because he was the most talented applicant and he has the most experience, right? We fixed it. So what you want to make sure of is that pronouns agree with their antecedent. Ante means before in Latin. We want to look for what comes before it that it refers to, right? What is the noun that it stands in for? They have to agree. So these are a couple of examples of pronouns that are in agreement with their referent, right? My dogs are so happy when they get new toys. They is a pronoun standing in for my dogs, and it happens to agree, right? Dogs and they. It would be incorrect if it said, for example, my dogs are so happy when it get new toys, right? That would not work. That would not agree. We want a pronoun to agree with its antecedent, right? That bicycle is missing its seat. It's is the pronoun in this sentence. It's in a possessive form, by the way. We'll get back to that later. And bicycle is its antecedent. It happens to agree with it, right? Bicycle, it's, right? So let's look at how this might show up in a question. Which part of the passage could be revised to correct an error in pronoun usage? Let's take a look. Oh yes, back to our same beautiful passage we just looked at. So let's see, it wants to know maybe part 1, 2, 3, or 4. Let's go back to part 1. Metals are classified as precious metals only if it is both rare and economically valuable. All right, already something is standing out to me. Metals is plural, right? Is the verb that you would use if you had a singular item, right? The boat is, the sun is, the book is. You wouldn't say the books is, right? You'd say the books are. So we already have a pronoun, a pronoun, an antecedent error. Metals and it is a mismatch as far as antecedents go. We could just skip all of this. The answer is A, but let's keep going just to see why we don't have that in the other parts, right? In part 2, as opposed to common metals like iron and lead, which are both abundantly available, metals like gold, silver, and platinum are in high demand, but are also in very limited supply. We don't have a pronoun in that sentence at all, so that's pretty easy to skip, right? Gold, for example, is so highly valued that humans have, over the centuries, endeavored to procure it in a variety of ways. Gold and it pronoun or antecedent, is gold and it, they're perfectly consistent. We're good. And part 4, if precious metals weren't so rare, they wouldn't be worth so much. They is the pronoun there. It stands in for metals. They're in agreement. We're all good. We can skip it, right? So the answer to this one is A. So next, you are likely to see questions about dangling or misplaced modifiers. What is a modifier? Modifiers are groups of words that add information to a noun. When the MTEL writing subtest asks you about these, it is likely that they will show up in these clauses that begin the sentence, right? These groups of words that open the sentence. So this is where you are likely to see dangling or misplaced modifiers, is at the beginning of the sentence. So here's an example of a misplaced modifier. Standing 6'3" tall, the Kansas City Chiefs are lucky to have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. Logically, you know that Patrick Mahomes is the only person in the sentence. So Patrick Mahomes is who we're talking about when we say standing 6'3" tall, right? But we are not talking about logical world. We are talking about grammar world. And in the world of grammar rules, modifiers have to be right next to the thing they're modifying. So if you start a sentence with a phrase like this that modifies something, the word it's modifying has to come immediately after it. So as far as grammarians are concerned, in this sentence, what we are saying is 6'3" is the Kansas City Chiefs, because that phrase or word being modified has to come immediately after the modifier that comes before it. So here's how we could fix this. Standing 6'3" tall, Patrick Mahomes is the talented quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. So you can see there, we fixed the problem. So let's look at how this might show up on the MTEL. Which part of the passage contains a misplaced or dangling modifier? Let's look at our options here. We have A is part 3. Let's take a look and see if we have that. They are an enduring and popular tourist attraction. There's not a modifier in there to be misplaced, so we're all good. Let's look at part 4. Originally known as Leo Astor and Leo Lennox in favor of the two, or in honor, of the two libraries' founders, the Lions were later nicknamed Lady Astor and Lord Lennox. Okay, so originally known as Leo Astor and Leo Lennox in honor of the two libraries' founders, that is a phrase that modifies something. That's a modifier, but it's modifying the Lions, and they come right after that modifier. So we are perfect, right? We don't have that error there. Let's see, part 5 is answer option C. In the 1930s, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia finally coined the name that has remained with the Lions to this day. Okay, great. Nothing wrong there. There's no misplaced modifying phrase there. Now let's look at 7. Now in place for over a century, many New Yorkers consider patience and fortitude to be as iconic as the library itself. Remember what I said? If we are to follow the rules of grammar, now in place for over a century, that is a modifier that's opening this sentence. So whatever it's modifying needs to come immediately after it. So what this looks like in grammar terms is that many New Yorkers are now in place for over a century, and that's not right, right? Patience and fortitude, those are the 2 lions. They are the ones who have been in place for over a century. So that's a misplaced modifier. So the answer there is D. That is a misplaced modifier. Okay. Another thing that you are likely to see on the MTEL is errors regarding prepositions. Prepositions are little phrases that are part of sentences that give you an idea of where things are in relation to other things, right? So these begin with prepositions, words like in, to, from, for. They position things in relation to other things. So what they're looking for is misplaced prepositions, or you've used the wrong preposition, right? So let's look what these might look like. So sentence A is our first option, or part 1 is our first option, excuse me. We're looking for an error in prepositions. In 1958, a white man named Richard Loving married his fiancée of mixed African-American and Native American descent, Mildred Jeter, at Washington, D.C. Uh-oh. Already, we know something is wrong, right? I always talk about the test if it clangs on your ear. That word at is a preposition, and it is not the right one, right? If you say that you marry someone and you're talking about that marriage taking place somewhere, you would say you got married in Washington, D.C., right? Not at Washington, D.C. So once again, we have A as our correct answer option. That is the incorrect preposition. We can look at these other answer options though. Part 3 is the other option. In order to avoid jail time, the Lovings agreed to leave the state and moved to Washington, D.C. There's a couple of prepositions there, but they're right. However, after 5 years in exile, that's another prepositional phrase, they decided to challenge the law so they would return to Virginia and live legally as a married couple. Everything is good there. Part 4, that's our answer option C. With the help of the ACLU, the Lovings sued the state and their case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, where Richard Loving asked his attorney to convey a simple but powerful message: tell the court that I love my wife and it is unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia. All right, we're all good there grammatically, right? Nothing clangs on your ear, none of those prepositions, those little phrases. Although Richard and Mildred, this is our last answer option, returned to Central Point and attempted to live outside of the spotlight for their remaining years, there's little doubt as to the importance of the Lovings' enduring and aptly named legacy, not just for the South, but for the whole country. A note about capitalization there. As I'm reading through it, I already notice that word, the South, since they're talking about a specific geographic region, this needs to be capitalized, right? Because if you say the North or the South and you are talking about like specific, formal geographic areas of the United States, that needs to be capitalized, just as a note there, okay? But that's not what being asked. We are being asked about prepositions. And in that case, part 1 is the only place that there was an incorrect or missing preposition. So that is the answer to number 14 there, okay? The next thing you're likely to see on the MTEL, I actually didn't see any examples of this in the practice test that I have access to, but just in case, we'll review them. They will ask you for the incorrect use of relative pronouns to be able to identify that. So the words that and which refer to things, right? Who refers to people. So if I said, I picked I adopted a beagle, which is the friendliest dog breed in the United States, right? Or something like that. I have a beagle right next to me in her bed, actually. That would refer to a thing. As much as my dog is a family member, she is an animal, right? And not a person. The word who refers to people. So you might see an example of an incorrect pronoun in the case of something like this. Sally is the assistant that works in my mother's office. So since we're referring to a person, we would not want to say that. We would want to say Sally's the assistant who works in my mother's office, right? Okay. Next, you are likely to see commonly confused homonyms. Homonyms are. That word homo in Latin means same, nim means name. So it basically means these are words that that sound similar, but they have different definitions, right? So these are really tricky for people. So there, and there is a classic one. One trick for distinguishing between these is if you see there, THERE, you can remember to yourself that word here is in it, here and there. There refers to places, right? And that's all it will ever refer to, right? You know, I have 3 friends who live there, something like that. We go there together. We're talking about a place. There, THEIR is possessive, and it means belonging to them, right? Their shoes, their swimming trunks, their towels. Can you tell I'm thinking of the beach? So there is always possessive. There, THEY apostrophe RE always stands for they are. So this apostrophe stands in for a missing letter. And this is just, you know, over the course of hundreds of years of people speaking the English language, we tend to go for the path of least resistance. So words that, you know, words get kind of mashed up together because they're easier to say out loud. So this is just, you know, example, if you say there quickly, you would omit that A. So the apostrophe stands in for a missing letter, right? So they apostrophe RE is always they are, right? Okay. Another commonly confused homonym they're likely to ask you about, and this I actually saw this on one of our sample questions earlier in this very video, is the difference between affect and effect. So the way that I tell students to remember this is that affect with an A, if you ever see that A, remember it's active. Affect is a verb, always, right? The drought affected our crops. Now, for the sake of full disclosure, there's an instance where the word affect with an A can be used for a noun as a noun that it refers to emotion. You will never see that on the MTEL, right? Anytime this word shows up on the MTEL, it's a verb, right? Affected with an A. The drought affected our crops. Active, it's a verb. Effect with an E is a noun, like the effect of the drought was enormous, right? So that's the difference between those. Next, they love to ask about this. I've seen one of these on every single MTEL that I have ever looked at. The its and it apostrophe s phenomenon. It apostrophe s is always 100% of the time, without exception, short for it is. So if you see an apostrophe, you need to say out loud, it is, right? Or say it to yourself, sound it out. This should eliminate any confusion, because you wouldn't see something like this sentence I have below. If it said the alligator showed it apostrophe s teeth, and you said that out loud, the alligator showed it is teeth, you would know it was not right. So it's is always a contraction for it is, it apostrophe s, always. It's with no apostrophe is possessive. So it's used to refer to things that belong to other things, right? So for example, the alligator showed its teeth. The teeth belong to the alligator. So the alligator, speaking of pronoun reference or antecedents, the alligator is the antecedent for its, and it's possessive in this case, right? Now, the dastardly squirrely MTEL, I've seen them ask this a few times, at least once per MTEL. It's with an apostrophe at the end is an answer option. Don't fall for this, because it is never correct. That construction does not exist ever, ever. It's not possible. It's with an apostrophe on the end is not ever the correct answer. If you see it, eliminate it, right? Okay. So now moving on to spelling, capitalization, and punctuation errors. The MTEL wants to know that you are comfortable recognizing common errors of spelling, capitalization, and punctuation, spelling errors, standard capitalization, and identifying missing commas or misplaced apostrophes. So this is where the dreaded sentence correction items are going to come into play. These are really challenging for a lot of test takers because you're not given multiple choice options, and you have to be able to not only identify the error, but also know how to fix it, because you have to actually rewrite the sentence, right? The good news is that the MTEL is going to show you a limited number of errors that show up in a limited number of ways. They don't ask for, you know, an unending huge list of mistakes they want you to be able to fix. They show a finite number of items that are related to a lot of the issues that came up in the multiple choice questions, right? So let's look at this example. Each of these sentences in the sentence correction questions are going to contain 2 errors, and you need to rewrite the text to fix the sentence, but to retain the original meaning. So here's a sentence. He likes to read novels. They made him see the world from different perspectives. Do you notice something right away that we've talked about earlier? I do. We have here a run-on sentence. A run-on sentence is when you have more than one independent clause that is not joined correctly with either a semicolon or a comma and a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, right? We also have in this sentence a verb agreement error. We're jumping around in verb tense. So the first independent clause in the sentence is he likes to read novels, right? But the next part of the sentence is they made him see the world from different perspectives. That's the second independent clause. So first of all, we know we need to punctuate this. We could say he likes to read novels, comma, because they made him see the world from different perspectives. Or we could say he likes to read novels, semicolon, they make him see the world from different perspectives. We need to fix the tense of that verb made because it is in the past tense and likes is in the present tense, right? So any way that you decide to fix that, there are multiple ways of fixing that, but I will show you what I think is the most effective way of doing that. So if I had my druthers, this is how I would correct this sentence. I would say he likes to read novels, semicolon, they make him see the world from different perspectives. You want to be careful to retain the original meaning. So even though I'm not crazy about how they make him see the world is phrased, I wouldn't want to, for example, change the verb or go to too much effort to make changes in the sentence because we want to make sure that we maintain the original meaning. Otherwise, you could just completely rewrite it and, you know, not just correct the errors. So you want to maintain fidelity to the original sentence, right? So let's look at this next one. Due to her inexperience working in offshore commercial fishing, she was not afraid to run onto danger. All right, we have 2 problems here. As you might notice right away when reading it out loud, we have a dependent clause due to her experience working in offshore commercial fishing and an independent clause that can stand alone. She was not afraid to run onto danger. Also, we know right away that's a preposition problem, right? It's you don't run onto danger, you run into danger, right? So we're going to fix that. But we need something right here. We need a comma to separate this dependent clause from this independent clause, right? So that's what we're going to want to do here. So when all is said and done, this is how the sentence is going to look corrected. Due to her experience working in offshore commercial fishing, period, she was not afraid to run into danger. Here's another example where we see a capitalization error and the famous there error, right? The siblings wanted to surprise their father with an unexpected gift. Remember, if you find just one error, don't rush to correct it. You need to find 2. There are 2 in every sentence, right? So the first one we can see right off the bat. I hope it stands out to you, or it should. There's no reason for father to be capitalized, right? It is not a proper noun. It's not somebody's like proper official name. So that doesn't need to be capitalized. I know that in some religious texts, maybe if you say, you know, our father, you might be referring to God and then you might capitalize it. But if you're just talking about like somebody's dad, no, don't capitalize that. There is not the right form of there. Remember, if you see H-E-R-E, that refers to location. That doesn't make any sense in this context, right? We're looking for the possessive version. We don't want they are father. So just by process of elimination here, we want T-H-E-I-R because the father is something that belongs to the siblings, right? It's something that they have. They have a father. So this is how this will look when all is said and done. The siblings wanted to surprise their father with an unexpected gift. Beautiful. This next sentence has an error that you are going to be asked about not super often on the MTEL, but they like to ask you to identify like commonly misused words or just like improperly used words. They also love to throw in unnecessary commas around things that don't need to be there. And this is a great example of that. Only people who had instilled their money in the project opposed its discontinuation. One great way to notice whether or not a comma is necessary is that commas indicate a place where you should pause, right? In fact, that was the original reason that commas were developed. They were added to medieval manuscripts so that people reading them out loud knew when to pause for effect. So this would read, only people who had instilled their money in the project opposed its discontinuation. That's not a group of words that needs to be separated from the rest of the sentence with commas, right? We want to get rid of both of those commas. Only people who had instilled their money in the project opposed its discontinuation, which brings me to another point, that word instilled. There's not a great way to study for this except to read attentively and to know that if nothing else is wrong in the sentence, which there's not in this sentence, right? Our pronoun here, its, agrees with its antecedent, which is project. Its is also the correct form of its. If it had an apostrophe, that would be wrong, but everything else here is okay. And also those commas around the who had instilled their money in the project, those count as one error, which is, I know, a little bit tricky. But the other error that's here is instilled, right? That should be only people who had invested their money in the project. So that's what we would want to see on the other side of this. Only people who had invested their money in the project opposes discontinuation. The MTEL kind of treats these two as a pair of commas, like working together, right? Which is why we would think that they're one error, is that sentence should not be, or that part of the sentence should not be set off from the sentence with commas. Okay. So that does it for the sentence correction issue. If you familiarize with yourself with all of the rules that we've talked about and all the common errors that we've talked about and how you might encounter them, you will be able to answer these very quickly. They ask these in a very predictable set of ways. So this brings me to the part of this exam that is the hardest to prepare for because it is the culmination of all of this material, and that is the open response section. I am going to devote another video to this within the next month or so, but these are the hardest to do, the open response questions, because if you struggle with writing, especially timed writing, it's very hard to account for everything that they're looking for. So once again, the best way to prepare for this, I hate to say it, is practice, practice, practice. And also, if you look on the MTEL's official website, they offer a lot of previous answer options that they will designate as being strong or weak. So you can look at what other test takers have done that the scorers of the MTEL like and ones that they don't like. One of these the writing sections on the test is the open response section. And this is, the first one is, writing a summary section. So in a summary, you'll be given a 4 to 5 page paragraph, not page, that would be awful. You'll be given a 4 to 5 paragraph passage about some incredibly boring topic. And what you'll need to do is write an 100 to 150 word summary. I know this is not much fun because you do have to kind of count the words you're using, which I suggest you do as you go. You'll need to accurately and thoroughly convey the main ideas and major details of the passage. So what do you need to do here? Well, you want to summarize the important main ideas of the passage. Why was this passage written? What is the big important stuff that I'm expecting it to convey, that they want to convey? What do they want me to remember about this? You want to leave out minor or insignificant details, right? If you're talking about, why the South lost the Civil War, you don't want to include details, or if that's the main idea of the passage, in your summary, you don't want to include minute details about, specific battle sites or something along those lines, unless they play into the overall main point. You want to sum up major ideas. You'll also, as you're writing, want to use transitional cues because organization is really big to the people scoring this thing. So you'll want to use things like first, furthermore, more, however, and kind of pay attention to those as you're reading between now and when you take the MTEL, so you can kind of get used to using them. You'll also want to write in your own words. Don't copy series of words from the passage. If you can avoid it at all, be really careful with that. Switch up the length and structure of your sentences. Go back and review my slides about compound and compound complex sentences and complex sentences and switch them up, right? Use one of those introductory phrases like, while agriculture was important to the South's economy, comma, and structure your sentences that way. They look at variety of sentence length. So they look for some long sentences, some short ones. They look for variety in your vocabulary. They look for variety in the structure of your sentences. So this is a time for you to pull out all the stops and try all the different tricks that you have in your toolbox, right? There's a nice mixed metaphor for you. And also you'll want to avoid errors. So if there's a word or a phrase that you know you have trouble with, like if you, like me, I had trouble, this is embarrassing, which is appropriate. I misspelled the word embarrassing for a really long time, or the word license. I can never figure out how to spell that freaking thing. So if there's something you know you struggle with, don't use it, because you're going to make an unnecessary error. Like try something else, right? You'll want to take risks here, but take like measured, calculated risks, right? And don't do something if it's going to be tricky to you. So this is the example of a type of passage that you'll want to summarize. I'm just going to read some of it here just for the sake of time, but you're welcome to pause it and read the whole passage on your own. The history of elementary and secondary education in the US has been shaped in part by debates about school reform. A major debate that drew the attention of educators at the turn of the 20th century pertains to the following question. Should education be centered on the dissemination of knowledge from one generation to the next, or should it be centered on the cognitive, emotional, and social development of each and every individual student? Scholarly studies on learning and cognitive growth show that the views presented by the two sides of the debate complement rather than oppose each other. I already know a lot about what's going on here. So I'm going to stop because, again, this is active reading, and the conversation I'm about to have out loud to myself, I want you to get used to having this conversation in your head, right? And quickly. What is this paragraph saying? And we know from our years of being in writing classes, the introduction is where you communicate your thesis. That's where the main idea of your passage is. So just based on what I just read, there have been competing ideas in school reform. Should we focus on just like packing students' heads full of knowledge that they might need to know and retain? Or should we focus on like the individual growth of the student, right? Their social development, their psychological development, their emotional development. And what these authors want to say of this passage is that those are not totally competing ideas, that they can work, excuse me, coughing fit. They can work in symphony with each other, right? They can be together. So we can help students to learn all the knowledge that they need to know going into this life and passing that information down. And we can make sure that we attend to their individual growth and social development, right? So we have either option. Whew, sorry there, I had to pause again to sneeze. Okay, woo-wee, okay, let's keep going. The pedagogical emphasis on the dissemination of knowledge has often been associated with a traditional vision of schooling. Its popular origins can be traced to the age-old idea that child nurturing includes providing the child with the best knowledge and skills available to the parent generation. This view maintains that a classroom teaching and learning should follow a carefully designed curriculum that specifies the order in which students need to acquire knowledge. Okay, great. So we know that certain people believe that, or the traditional sort of view of schooling holds that we need to just like disseminate knowledge, right? And they say that basically a landmark event in this kind of education was the Nation at Risk report, right? Okay, so that's traditional schooling. So if I were taking notes, I would say, you know, dissemination of knowledge, or, you know, content knowledge, traditional, right? So let's move on. Student-centered approaches have often been associated with progressive movement in education. The pedagogical ideas of this movement can be traced to the rise of the modern discipline of child psychology associated with John Dewey. Student-centered approaches originated in the progressive area, which was the period of widespread reform, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this talks about, you know, students should have the independence to pursue stuff they're interested in. You know, they should learn, they should mature, and, you know, participate in discussions, all this great kind of stuff, right? Studies of human learning and the growth of knowledge suggest that curriculum-centered and student-centered views on education are much more complementary and intertwined than opposed. Again, this is going back to that big major point in that thesis statement that told us that these two approaches are not in conflict with each other. They can complement each other, right? So they say basically, moving along here, learning from others through a curriculum is an essential aspect of child's development. Adult models of thought and behavior often inspire children and promote their ability to develop their talents. Moreover, the transmission of knowledge is intended to demonstrate how learners can advance their understanding rather than simply instill facts. So they say this transmission of knowledge help students to learn how to think, not just what to think, right? So we don't want to throw that out and get rid of it altogether. And so this is basically saying, even though this student-centered individual approach is a great approach to learning, let's not throw out the traditional model because there's stuff that we can learn from it. So those are the big ideas. So when you go to summarize this passage, what you want to avoid doing is mentioning details like, for example, the fact that John Dewey was associated with the progressive movement. You can talk about that, but you definitely don't want to like mention the dates of the progressive era. That's too specific. You don't want to mention the Nation at Risk report. They will notice if you include details that are that specific, and they will dock you for it because they don't want to see you incorporating details. They want to see you focusing on major main ideas, right? Like, what are the takeaway messages? If you were going to sum this up for somebody quickly, what are the take home messages? Is this an exciting passage? Of course not. It's boring and it includes unfamiliar words. So what you want to do is cling to stuff that you do understand. If you don't understand the word pedagogical, ignore it and try to understand based on context what other stuff is going on here. Practice that active reading so that you can summarize each paragraph. And again, this is a practice that you should do not just with practice MTELs, but with everything you read. Stuff you're reading for your classes, stuff you read for pleasure. Find articles online that talk about critical reading and active reading and practice those strategies. Because what you're going to want to do here is not mention, again, overly specific items. You also don't want to add anything that's not here. You don't want to bring in examples from your life or from your experience. You want to summarize what is on the page in your own words, leave out insignificant details, use those transitional cues, write again in your own words, but communicating their ideas. And also be sure that you're switching up the length and structure of your sentences, and be mindful of that and be attentive to that. If there's a writing center at your institution, what a good thing to do would be to maybe bring a sample of your writing into an appointment at the writing center, or a virtual appointment now, and ask them to be attentive to how well you are using varied sentences, right? Ask for them to help you with ideas for how you can write more complex sentences or write longer sentences. Because if you are not comfortable writing, you are not going to just magically be comfortable writing on the MTEL. It just doesn't happen, right? So practice this. Time yourself. Once you've written a response, take some of this information to a writing center appointment or to a peer, or send one to me, and let me kind of guide you through how well you're doing this, right? How well you're summarizing those main ideas. And again, on the MTEL website, there are examples of high scoring summaries and low scoring summaries, so you can get an idea of what they're looking for, right? The next and the much longer writing assignment that you're going to be given is the composition exercise. And this is probably the last thing you're going to have to do on the MTEL. You're going to be given 2 passages that take competing positions on an issue, and you are going to write a 300 to 600 word response in which you argue for one of the positions. I believe that if you take this online as an online proctored test, since always they're computer based, you want to pay attention to how long you're going, so check in on it often, but you don't have to count your words because the program will do that for you, right? So you'll know when you're about to like go over time. So this is an example of what you might see. And again, are these going to be super exciting? Absolutely, of course not. So this example is about the redshirting of kindergarten age children, right? Okay, here's argument number 1. Redshirting of kindergarten age children should be permissible. This is the pro position, right? Parents and guardians should be allowed to delay their child's entrance into kindergarten for 1 year if their child would be among the youngest students in kindergarten the first year the child is eligible, right? So if their birthday happens to line up so that they'd be, super young when they entered kindergarten. Redshirting allows students to fit in better than non-redshirted students, helping ensure that they're physically and socially prepared for kindergarten. Okay, that makes sense. So like if you're the youngest kid in your class, you might be, developmentally behind your peers. So sure, I get it. Also, I'm modeling for you what I think you should do silently, internally, which is working through these ideas actively as you're reading them. Otherwise, you're going to glaze over, you're going to get done reading the whole thing and be like, I have no idea what I just read or what I'm supposed to write about, right? So get used to this process of, even if you're talking to yourself, stop and summarize, right? This in turn makes them better prepared for the subsequent grade levels of their educations, which may have significant positive long-term effects. Because redshirted students are likely to have some advantages in motor skills and physical development, they tend to be more confident than non-redshirted students and may have a greater tendency toward leadership. All right, so that's again the pro position. And here's the con position. Redshirting of kindergarten age children should not be permissible. Parents and guardians should not be allowed to delay their child's entrance into kindergarten for 1 year if their child would be among the youngest students in kindergarten the first year the child is eligible. Evidence is not conclusive that students benefit academically, emotionally, or otherwise when they are redshirted, and some evidence suggests that redshirted students may be more prone to behavioral problems as teens. Additionally, the majority of redshirted students come from higher income families who can afford to pay for an extra year of childcare, which means that if redshirting is beneficial for students, it's beneficial primarily for high income students and therefore adds to the achievement gap. Okay, sounds great to me. And here is what we're supposed to do with this information. Your purpose is to write a persuasive composition as an argumentative essay to be read by a classroom instructor in which you take a position on whether the redshirting of kindergarten age children should be permissible. Be sure to defend your position with logical arguments and appropriate examples. And you already have some material to go off of here. So you are going to want to take a position on this issue. Personally, I think that there is significantly better argument, and this is usually the case, there is a significantly better argument for the con position because it more cohesively and comprehensively brings up the idea of there being evidence-based research to indicate that there are not benefits for redshirted students. So it seems to be the stronger of the two arguments because it mentions the fact that evidence supports that position, right? But when you do this, what you're going to want to do is to be clear and concise. So you are going to want to begin your response with an introduction in which you give an overview of the issue, right? Something like, one of the most important decisions a parent can make are decisions related to the education of their children. One debate in this area is whether or not you should redshirt kindergarten age children because of blah, blah, blah. Basically summarize the two positions and then write a clear thesis statement. This should end your first paragraph. You should tell me how you feel. One little trick for doing any persuasive essay like this that will help you to succeed is to kind of straddle the fence a little bit, right? So to give sort of a nuanced answer where you say, while some children might benefit from redshirting, overall, it should not be done because of X, Y, and Z, right? You want to show that you understand both sides of the argument and that you're being fair in weighing the options against each other. So the best kind of answer is one that gives credence or validity to both sides of the argument, but then comes down firmly on one side and backs it up with evidence. So in this particular essay, you can use examples. So if you have examples from your own life, from somebody you could come up with a hypothetical situation, but you want to make sure that you are clearly and accurately representing the arguments. So you will want to maintain focus. Remember, organizational focus is key on these responses. So you will want to write clear topic sentences. So those are the first sentences of each paragraph, and make sure that each paragraph only focuses on one major idea. There's a lot going on with these two arguments, right? There's a lot of sort of major ideas within these arguments. So there's the issue of behavioral problems. There's the issue of the kind of the class, income related, achievement gap related area here. There's the issue of academic performance. So you'll want to devote a paragraph to each of those major ideas and use clear transition between them. Remember also, switch up the length of your sentences, use words correctly, and vary your vocabulary. So switch it up as you go along, right? That's essential to doing well in this test. So that is an overview of all of the sections of the writing subtest. I know this was a lot. My suggestion to you is that you read and review the PowerPoint for this, which I've linked below in the description. I also think that you should find a site or some kind of a grammar website or resource that you find easy to understand. I will give you some options for that. And to study these rules. So to study and practice identifying sentence fragments, identifying run-on sentences, identifying how to correctly use a semicolon, paying attention to verb tense, to get used to seeing those kinds of errors so that when you see them on the MTEL, you're not surprised by them. Also, have someone, either a professor of yours or someone at the writing center at your institution, or send it to me, take a look at your writing and give you an idea of how to improve your organization, and how to vary your sentence structure and length. This could be just somebody looking at an essay that you wrote last semester and giving you pointers about how to improve your writing, right? Anything you do can help, but it's also a good idea to access one of these practice tests and give it a try. Try responding to one of them, and then have somebody from your institution kind of look at it and see what they think. Even a roommate or a friend who has an idea of how they'll be scoring this. I don't know if you're allowed to have roommates right now. Anyway, it's COVID season. So to look at the criteria they use when they score this, which is available online, and give you an idea of how you did. So thank y'all very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Any questions that you have, please send them to profhermanson@gmail.com or leave them in the comments below. And I look forward to seeing y'all again soon for another video about the Common Literacy MTEL. Thanks so much. Have a good one.